The billionaire had been traveling for weeks, moving from one city to another, from one meeting to the next. His life was always full of schedules, flights, and endless discussions about deals, investments, and opportunities. Money, power, and influence were all around him, yet there was one thing he could not buy: time. He had learned long ago that no amount of wealth could slow down life or make moments come back once they were gone. His home. A large and elegant house in a quiet neighborhood. Had always been a place he thought he could escape to. A place of peace, if only for a little while. But lately, even home felt distant. His son, who had been paralyzed in a terrible accident a year ago, had changed everything. Life at home had slowed down, not in a way he could control, but in a way that demanded patience, attention, and care he was not always able to give. On this particular evening, he decided to return home earlier than planned. The idea had come suddenly. He had been in a long meeting discussing an acquisition worth millions, and he found his mind wandering to thoughts of home, of his son, of the quiet house and the people who kept it running. There was a small voice inside him, one he rarely listened to, telling him that maybe, just maybe, he needed to see things for himself, to step away from the endless obligations and actually be present. The drive home was familiar. The city lights blurred past the car window, and he noticed the small things that usually went unnoticed. A street vendor selling food late at night. A group of children laughing as they ran down the street, the glow of the houses lining the roads. He thought about his own son, trapped in his wheelchair, facing the world with courage he had never imagined. He remembered the day of the accident, the sound of sirens, the hospital waiting room, the helplessness he had felt. Nothing in his life had prepared him for that moment, and nothing in his life could erase it. When he arrived home, the house was quiet. The lights were on in a few rooms, soft and warm, but the usual buzz of activity was absent. His footsteps echoed in the hallway as he walked toward the living room, expecting perhaps to see his son watching television or reading or maybe asleep. What he saw instead was a scene that stopped him in his tracks. His son was sitting in his wheelchair, looking smaller than he remembered, yet somehow strong in a way that surprised him. Beside him, moving with grace and patience, was the maid. She was someone he had always noticed in passing. A loyal presence in the household, someone who managed the home with quiet efficiency. He had always assumed her work was simple, ordinary, and yet here she was, doing something extraordinary. She had a gentle smile on her face, the kind of smile that did not require words to express care. She was adjusting his position slightly, making sure he was comfortable, and talking to him in a way that made him laugh. The sound was soft, but it carried across the room, filling the space with warmth. For the first time in a long while, the billionaire felt a pang of emotion he could not name. There was pride, there was gratitude, and there was a deep, unexpected tenderness. He realized he had missed so much. The meetings, the travel, the endless chase for more wealth, more deals, more recognition, had kept him away from moments like this. Simple moments, but moments that mattered far more than anything money could buy. He watched quietly, not wanting to interrupt, not wanting to disturb the connection that was happening before his eyes. The maid's hands moved carefully. With a rhythm that spoke of experience and understanding, she helped him adjust the blanket over his legs, then reached for a book his son had wanted to read. She read aloud, her voice calm and steady, full of emotion and attention to detail. The billionaire noticed how his son's eyes lit up, how he leaned forward, eager to listen, eager to be part of the world around him despite the limitations of his body. It was not just care. It was love in action. The billionaire had always thought of love as something grand, something shown through gifts, trips, or extravagant gestures. But what he saw now was quiet, consistent, patient, and real. It was the kind of love that did not announce itself with noise or wealth, but existed in small, meaningful actions every day. He remembered the countless times he had promised his son he would spend more time with him, only to cancel plans or push them aside because of work. He remembered the guilt that had followed him into every meeting, every conversation, but had been drowned out by the constant demands of his empire. Now, standing at the edge of the room, he felt that guilt sharply, painfully. but also something else. A determination to change, to pay attention, to truly see the people who mattered most. The maid's dedication struck him in ways he had never expected. She had been with the family for years, yet he had rarely looked beyond her duties. Now he saw her not just as an employee, but as someone who had chosen to care deeply. Someone who had chosen to make a difference in the life of his son without ever expecting recognition or reward. Her presence was steady, her actions deliberate, and her heart clearly full of compassion. As he watched, the son reached for a toy that had fallen slightly out of reach. The maid bent down, carefully lifting him just enough so he could grab it, then settling him back in his chair with a gentle laugh. The billionaire's breath caught in his throat. He had never imagined such patience, such creativity, such courage. It was not easy to care for someone in this way. It required strength, dedication, and a heart willing to give without limit. He thought about the times he had rushed past, the moments of frustration when his son could not do what others could, the times he had felt helpless or impatient, and now, seeing this simple scene of care and attention, he understood that true strength was not measured in wealth, power, or accomplishments. It was measured in the love and compassion we give to others, especially when it is not required, expected, or convenient. The billionaire stood there for what felt like hours, though in reality it was only minutes, drinking in the scene. He noticed the little things, the way the maid's hair fell over her shoulders as she leaned in, the careful way she adjusted the blanket, the twinkle in her eyes as she encouraged his son to try a small movement, the small laugh that escaped his son's lips. It was a scene of ordinary life, yet it held extraordinary meaning. He realized that he had been blind to the impact people could have on one another simply by being present. He had thought that his presence, his attention, would come with grand gestures or big conversations. But here it was, in the smallest of actions, in the quietest of moments, that he saw the world differently. The maid had shown him that life was not about the empire he had built, but about the people who filled it with love and connection as he slowly moved toward the room. Careful not to startle them, he felt a mixture of emotions he could not name. Pride in his son for his courage and strength, awe at the maid for her dedication and heart, and a sharp awareness of how much he had missed. There was regret, certainly, but also hope that things could change, that he could be more present, that he could finally understand what truly mattered. The house was silent except for the soft conversation between the maid and his son, punctuated by laughter and gentle encouragement. He noticed the way the maid adjusted the room, making it comfortable, moving objects closer, arranging pillows, and paying attention to every detail. He realized that love often showed itself not in grand statements, but in small acts, repeated day after day, with consistency and care. For the billionaire, this was a revelation. He had always believed that wealth and status were the ultimate markers of success. Yet in this moment, he understood that the greatest achievements in life were the connections we make, it's the love we give, and the moments we share. His son, though limited in movement, was rich in spirit. The maid, though limited in social status, was rich in heart. And he, despite all his wealth, realized he still had much to learn about what it meant to truly care. The evening went on quietly. The billionaire continued to watch, learning without speaking, absorbing every detail. He began to understand the rhythm of their lives, the routines that had developed, and the ways in which small acts of kindness and attention could change a life. The maid was not only caring for his son's physical needs, but nurturing his spirit, giving him confidence, joy, and hope. He also noticed the subtle ways she involved his son in small decisions, allowing him to have a sense of control, even in the limitations imposed by his condition. It was a delicate balance, one that required observation, empathy, and patience. The billionaire recognized that this was a skill, a gift even, and that it was given freely, without expectation. From someone who cared deeply, finally. As the evening grew darker, he moved closer, still quietly, letting them continue their interaction. He saw his son's face light up with joy, the laughter that came from genuine happiness, and the tender smiles exchanged between them. It was a scene he would never forget, a moment that would stay with him long after he returned to his busy life. a reminder of what truly mattered. The billionaire understood, in that quiet moment, that he had returned home not just to his house, but to a lesson in life. He had returned to witness the quiet heroism of someone who gave selflessly, who loved deeply, and who had transformed his son's world without ever asking for recognition. And he knew, deep in his heart, that things would never be the same again. Life had changed completely for the son after the accident. The world he had once moved through freely now felt confined, slow, and challenging. Every day was a mixture of struggle and small victories. Even something as simple as rolling from one side of the room to another required effort and patience. He had moments of frustration, moments when he wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. But more often than not, he smiled, pushed forward, and tried to focus on what he could do rather than what he could not. The mansion that had once been just a place of comfort had become a carefully structured space for his needs. Ramps replaced some of the steps, rooms were arranged to allow easier movement, and objects were placed within reach so he could maintain a sense of independence. But even with these adjustments, he needed help. Some days he depended on others more than he liked, especially on the maid, who would quietly become a central part of his life. The maid had always been attentive, organized, and efficient in her work. But after the accident, her role grew into something much more profound. She had learned how to lift him safely, how to help him exercise muscles that were weak, and how to encourage him to keep trying even when it was painful or frustrating. She did it all without complaint, with a patience that seemed endless, and without asking for anything in return. For the boy, she had become more than a helper. She had become a guide, a confidant, and a source of encouragement in a world that had suddenly become more difficult. Every morning she would arrive early, even before the sun had fully risen, and begin her quiet work. She would prepare breakfast, checking the temperature of the food to ensure it was just right, and help him get dressed. She had created a routine that balanced care with encouragement. When he felt discouraged, she found ways to make him smile. Sometimes she would tell stories. Sometimes she would play little games. Sometimes she simply sat beside him, listening to whatever he wanted to say. She understood that even the smallest gestures could make a huge difference. It was not just the physical care that mattered. The maid had also become an emotional anchor for him. She noticed when he felt sad or anxious and would sit with him until he felt ready to face the day. She encouraged him to continue learning, to explore interests that he could still pursue, and to find joy even in limitations. Slowly, over time, she helped him regain confidence. Though his body could not move like it used to, his mind, his spirit, and his heart remained strong. The maid reminded him every day that he was still capable of amazing things, even if the world seemed to have shifted beneath him. Despite her humble position in the household, the maid treated him with respect and dignity. She never spoke to him as if he were weak or less than others. She celebrated his accomplishments no matter how small and always encouraged him to try new things. She never acted as though her help was a burden. Instead, she showed that caring for someone could be a privilege, a way to make a real difference in another person's life. The boy had grown to trust her completely. He would share his fears, his dreams, and even his anger with her, knowing she would listen without judgment. There were days when he struggled with depression, frustrated by the limitations of his body. On those days, she would sit with him, sometimes in silence, sometimes holding his hand, sometimes telling him stories about the world outside the mansion walls. She reminded him that life, even when difficult, still held beauty and possibility. The billionaire, busy with his work, often failed to notice these moments. He believed that financial security, medical care, and material comfort were enough to support his son. He did not realize that what his son truly needed was someone who could see him as a whole person. Someone who could care for his emotional and mental well-being as much as his physical needs. It was only when he returned home unexpectedly, as he had this evening, that he truly saw what the maid had been doing all along. The relationship between the son and the maid was filled with small, significant moments that built over time. Every morning she would encourage him to practice exercises that would help maintain his strength, reminding him that consistency mattered more than speed. She created small challenges for him, celebrating each success and helping him understand that setbacks were only part of the journey. She made learning fun, turning exercises into games, tasks into adventures, so that he felt empowered rather than restricted. Even simple routines like eating meals had been transformed into moments of connection. She would arrange the food carefully, sometimes cutting it into shapes or presenting it in ways that made him smile. She would ask about his day, about what he wanted to do, about his thoughts and feelings. These conversations were small but important, a way for him to remain engaged with the world, to feel seen, and to maintain a sense of normalcy despite his challenges. The maid also understood the importance of letting him make choices. She never forced him to do anything he was uncomfortable with. Instead, she asked gently, offering options and letting him decide. This gave him a sense of control, something that had been taken from him by the accident. She reinforced the idea that he could still have independence, even if it looked different from before. Her dedication extended beyond the home. She would sometimes plan small outings, making sure they were safe and accessible, so he could experience the world outside. Even a walk in the garden or a visit to a nearby park became adventures with laughter, learning, and joy. These outings were rare and carefully arranged, but they reminded him that life still held opportunities for growth, fun, and exploration. The billionaire, though present in name, had missed all these moments. He had missed the growth, the laughter, the small victories that his son achieved daily. He had assumed that wealth and medical care were enough, but he now realized that true care required presence, patience, and love. The maid had given all of that freely, without expectation or reward, and in doing so had shaped his son's life in ways he had never imagined. The son, for his part, had learned to trust and appreciate her in ways he could not articulate fully. He often thought of her as a quiet hero, someone who had stood by him when the world seemed to have retreated. He knew that she cared deeply, and in her presence, he felt safe, encouraged, and capable. He had learned resilience through her guidance, discovering that even with limitations, he could still achieve goals, learn new things, and experience joy. Her impact was not limited to physical and emotional care. She had also become a source of moral guidance. She encouraged honesty, kindness, and empathy. She reminded him of the importance of gratitude, of noticing beauty in small things, and of giving to others when possible. She taught lessons not through lectures but through example, showing patience, respect, and dignity in every action she took. The billionaire, standing quietly in the doorway earlier that evening, finally began to understand all of this. He saw the bond that had formed, the trust that had been built, and the ways in which the maid had shaped his son's life. He realized that her care went far beyond duty. She had become an essential part of the family's life, someone whose presence was irreplaceable and whose love was genuine. In the weeks that followed his return, the billionaire observed more closely, taking note of every detail. He noticed how the maid anticipated his son's needs before he even asked, how she maintained patience during moments of frustration, and how she celebrated successes, no matter how small. He began to reflect on his own absence, wondering how he had overlooked the most important aspects of his son's life. He saw that care was not something that could be outsourced or bought. It required attention, empathy, and effort. The maid had given all of that willingly, and in doing so had taught him an invaluable lesson. Her dedication reminded him that love is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and constant, and it often appears in the smallest gestures that have the greatest impact. As days passed, the billionaire began to think differently about his priorities. He started to recognize that time with his son, even in simple routines, was more valuable than any meeting, any deal, or any acquisition. He felt a stirring of desire to change, to be present, and to contribute in ways that mattered beyond money. The maid's actions had opened his eyes to the importance of presence, compassion, and the power of human connection. The son continued his routines with the maid, each day a mixture of learning, laughter, and small triumphs. The bond between them remained strong, growing with every shared moment. The billionaire watched from a distance at first, learning silently, understanding the significance of the care that was so freely given. He realized that the real wealth in his life was not his fortune, but the love, trust, and resilience that surrounded him in his home. He had returned home, expecting quiet, expecting routine, and perhaps expecting to feel the familiar distance between him and his son. Instead, he discovered a world of care, connection, and compassion that humbled him, inspired him, and transformed the way he thought about his family, his responsibilities, and himself. And so, life at home continued, but with a new awareness. The son thrived in the care and guidance of the maid, finding strength and hope in her presence. The billionaire began to learn, slowly but surely, the importance of being present, of noticing the small moments and of valuing people over wealth. He saw the maid not just as an employee, but as a teacher, a guide, and a quiet hero whose love and dedication were shaping the heart of his family in ways he had never imagined. Every day became an opportunity to witness resilience, courage, and selflessness. The son learned that limitations did not define him. The maid demonstrated the power of care, patience, and dedication. And the billionaire began to understand that true wealth was measured not in dollars, but in moments of connection, acts of love, and the bonds that hold a family together, even in the most difficult circumstances. The evening was calm, the golden light of the setting sun spilling through the tall windows of the mansion.
Ow.
Inside, the house was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of papers or the soft shuffle of footsteps. The billionaire had returned. Home fully now, stepping more slowly into the spaces he had once hurried through. He moved with care, observing the life that had continued without him. A life filled with small routines and subtle victories that he had barely noticed before in the living room. His son was sitting in his wheelchair near the large window, the last rays of sunlight falling across his face. His eyes were bright, his spirit strong, yet there was a longing in him that the billionaire had never fully understood. He was reaching for something on the floor that had rolled just out of reach. His movements were slow and cautious, and the frustration that often accompanied such tasks was evident in the tightening of his jaw and the slight frown on his face. The maid, as always, was close by, moving with a grace and attentiveness that spoke of years of experience and care. She knelt beside him, ready to assist, but she did something unusual this time. Instead of simply handing the object back to him, she paused and looked at him with a smile. She spoke in a soft, encouraging voice, asking if he wanted to try a small stretch to reach it himself. Her words were gentle, patient, and full of belief in his abilities, even when he doubted himself. The son hesitated, glancing up at her. There was a moment of uncertainty, a brief flicker of doubt, and then he nodded. With the maid's guidance, he began to move, pushing his wheelchair slightly forward, extending his hand. It was difficult, every motion requiring effort, yet the maid stayed beside him, her hands ready to support if needed, her eyes never leaving his. The billionaire, standing at the edge of the room, felt his chest tighten. He had seen many things in his life, attended countless events, witnessed grand gestures, and negotiated deals worth millions. But nothing prepared him for this quiet, tender moment. The care, the patience, the unwavering belief that the maid had in his sonite was unlike anything he had ever encountered. His heart raced, not with excitement, but with awe and a deep, almost overwhelming emotion. The son reached for the object, a small ball that had slipped from his grasp during play. It was a simple act, yet monumental for him. The maid gently adjusted his position, supporting his back and shoulders, encouraging him with every word. And then, with a slight push, he grasped it. His face lit up, a triumphant smile spreading across his lips. The room, which had been quiet, seemed to echo with that small victory. Filling it with warmth and joy, the maid laughed softly, a sound that was as comforting as it was genuine. She praised him not in an exaggerated way, but with sincerity, recognizing the effort it took for him to achieve something so small, yet so meaningful. She reminded him that each step, each movement, each small success mattered, and that progress was not always about speed, but about persistence and courage. The billionaire could not tear his eyes away. He realized, with a clarity that startled him, that this was more than care. It was teaching, it was encouragement, it was love in action. He had always believed that love was expressed in grand gestures, expensive gifts, elaborate trips, or public recognition. But here, in this quiet living room, he saw that love could be patient, gentle, and consistent. It could exist in the steady presence of someone who believed in another person even when the world seemed to have moved on. The maid continued, guiding his son through small stretches and exercises designed to strengthen his muscles and improve his confidence. She spoke in soft tones, praising his effort, reminding him of what he had accomplished the day before, and encouraging him to try just a little further today. Her hands were steady, her touch reassuring, and every movement conveyed a message of hope and belief. The son responded to her encouragement with determination. He tried movements he would have once thought impossible, pushing past frustration and fear. Each time he succeeded, the maid celebrated quietly, her eyes shining with pride and love. It was a delicate balance, celebrating achievements without overpraising, giving independence while offering support, and instilling confidence while recognizing limitations. The billionaire felt a lump in his throat. He had always been proud of his son in his own way, but he had never fully appreciated the resilience, courage, and determination that his son displayed every day. The maid had been there through it all, guiding, teaching, and encouraging, never seeking credit, never asking for recognition. She had shaped his son's life with patience and care that the billionaire had never considered. Showing that love and dedication often go unseen until someone finally pays attention. Then came the moment that would stay with him forever. The son reached for a toy that had been slightly out of reach, a larger toy that required both strength and balance to grasp. The maid, instead of simply moving it closer, made a bold choice. She lifted him carefully, supporting him securely, holding him in a way that allowed him to reach the toy himself. The movement was gentle, precise, and perfectly safe, yet it was something the billionaire had never expected to witness. His heart pounded as he watched. The trust between the maid and his son was evident in every motion. The son felt secure, confident, and capable, knowing that the maid would not let him fall, that she believed in him even when he doubted himself. And in that moment, he did what he had not done in months. He reached, stretched, and held the toy with both hands. His face shone with joy, a mixture of triumph, excitement, and pride. The maid smiled, her eyes sparkling with happiness. She praised him softly, reminding him that he was capable, that effort mattered, and that she was proud of him. She guided him back safely to his wheelchair, ensuring that he was comfortable and relaxed, and then handed him the toy with a gentle flourish. The son laughed, a sound so pure and unrestrained that it filled the room with warmth and life. The billionaire could hardly breathe. He had expected to see care, to see routine, perhaps even a small smile. But what he witnessed was extraordinary. The maid had not only provided care, but had created a moment of empowerment, confidence, and joy for his son. It was an act of creativity, courage, and love. It's a demonstration of what it meant to care for someone fully, without hesitation or self-interest. He remembered all the times he had been absent, all the moments he had missed, and a deep pang of guilt struck him. He realized that no amount of wealth could replace these moments, that no deal, meeting, or acquisition could ever create the connection, the trust, or the joy that had been built in this quiet room over months of dedication. He had been blind to the most important wealth in his life, the relationships, the love and the care that truly mattered. The maid continued her work, helping his son with other small tasks, guiding him with patience, encouraging him with her words, and celebrating each achievement. She moved seamlessly between caregiver, teacher, and friend, never faltering, never tiring, and never expecting recognition. Her dedication was silent but powerful, and the billionaire finally understood the depth of her role in their lives. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, the billionaire took a step forward, quietly entering the space. He did not speak at first, afraid to disrupt the bond he was witnessing. But his presence was noticed, and his son looked up, a smile spreading across his face. The maid glanced at him briefly, her expression calm and professional, but her eyes held a spark of understanding. She knew he had seen what she had done. She knew the impact it would have on him. The billionaire knelt slightly, reaching out to touch his son's shoulder. Words failed him. He did not know how to express the mix of awe, gratitude, and humility that filled him. For a moment, he simply watched, letting the scene sink in, letting himself truly see the care, courage, and love that had been present all along. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and unsteady. He thanked her, not just for what she had done today, but for all the days she had devoted to his son, for all the small acts of care and encouragement, for all the moments that had gone unnoticed but had shaped his son's life in profound ways. The maid accepted his thanks with a simple nod, her humility evident, her focus still on his son. She did not seek praise, yet she had earned it in the most meaningful way possible. The son, sensing the shift in the room, smiled brightly. He had felt the change too, the recognition, the appreciation, and the bond that connected them all. It was a quiet celebration, a moment of connection that went beyond words. A reminder that true care is often shown in actions rather than statements. The billionaire knew, in that instant, that life had given him a lesson he would never forget. He had witnessed an act of love that was creative, courageous, and selfless. He had seen his son empowered, confident, and joyful. He had realized that the most important work in life is not measured in money, deals, or status. It is measured in care, connection, and the moments we create for those we love. As the evening settled into night, the three of them remained together in the room. The billionaire stayed longer than he had expected, watching, learning, and appreciating. He understood that the maid's incredible act for his son was not a one-time event, but the result of countless days of patience, dedication, and love. He felt humbled, grateful, and inspired to change how he approached his own life, how he treated his family, and how he valued the people who truly mattered in that quiet room. Filled with warmth and light, a new understanding blossomed. The son, the maid, and the billionaire all shared a silent bond, a recognition of the power of love, patience, and trust. It was a moment that would shape the family forever. A moment that reminded them that true strength comes from caring, that joy comes from connection, and that even the smallest actions can create the most profound impact. After that evening, the billionaire could not stop thinking about what he had witnessed. He had returned home expecting routine, expecting silence, perhaps expecting to feel disconnected, but instead, he had seen something extraordinary. The sight of the maid lifting his son, guiding him, and creating a moment of joy and confidence had left a lasting impression on him. He found himself reflecting on it constantly, replaying the scene in his mind. Noticing details he had missed the first time, he thought about the years he had spent focused on work, on meetings, on expanding his empire. He had believed that providing money, comfort, and security for his family was enough. He had assumed that as long as his son had the best medical care, the latest technology, and every comfort he could afford, he was fulfilling his role as a father. But now he realized how much he had missed. The physical care, the emotional support, the encouragement, the presence, these were the things that truly mattered, and they had been given freely by someone he had long taken for granted. The maid had been more than an employee. She had been a constant in his son's life, someone who had offered stability, care, and love without expectation. Her actions were selfless, deliberate, and full of compassion. She had chosen to dedicate herself to his son's well-being in ways the billionaire could never have imagined. And in doing so, she had given him a gift that could never be measured in dollars or property, a gift of joy, confidence, and hope. For days he replayed the scene in his mind. He thought about how she had encouraged his son to reach, to stretch, to believe in his own abilities. He remembered the laughter, the pride on his son's face, and the gentle, patient guidance of the maid. He realized that he had been blind to these moments before, absorbed in his own concerns to truly see what was happening at home. The guilt he felt was sharp, yet it was mixed with gratitude and admiration. He began to notice other moments he had. Overlooked the way she adjusted the blanket to make his son comfortable, the way she anticipated his needs, the way she celebrated every small victory without making it seem like a big deal. She had done all this quietly, without fanfare, without recognition. She had transformed his son's daily life with her care and dedication, and he had only just seen it. The billionaire reflected on his own absence. He remembered times when he had promised to spend the day with his son, only to cancel because of a meeting, a flight, or a deal that required immediate attention. He remembered the frustration he had felt when his son could not participate fully in activities he once enjoyed. He realized now that those moments of absence had been felt deeply by his son, and he knew, finally, that being present, truly present, was worth far more than any financial contribution or material gift. He started to pay closer attention to the routines at home. He watched how the maid prepared breakfast, carefully arranging everything to make it easy for his son to manage. He noticed how she encouraged him to eat, to participate, and to engage with the world around him. She made tasks that could have been frustrating or discouraging into moments of interaction, learning, and joy. The billionaire began to see the depth of her influence, the countless ways she had supported his son's growth and resilience. He also noticed the emotional bond between them. The son trusted her completely, confiding in her about his fears, his frustrations, and his small victories. He knew that she would listen without judgment, guide without pressure, and encourage without impatience. She had created a safe space for him, a space where he could be himself, free from judgment or expectation. This realization humbled the billionaire. He understood that love was not measured by money or status, but by presence, care, and dedication. The billionaire began to reflect on his own approach to parenting. He realized that he had often relied on material support to stand in for emotional presence. He had assumed that providing the best of everything was equivalent to being present. But he now understood that it was not enough. What his son needed most was not just comfort or care, but someone who would see him, guide him, and help him grow despite limitations. The maid had done this every day, quietly, consistently, and with heart. He felt a surge of admiration for her, mixed with a profound sense of humility. Here was someone with little power, little recognition, yet with immense influence. She had shaped his son's life, helped him regain confidence, and created a world where he could feel capable, valued, and joyful. And she had done it out of kindness, patience, and love. The billionaire realized that he had much to learn from her, not only about parenting, but about the true nature of care and compassion. In the following days, he made small changes in his behavior. He began spending more time with his son, sitting with him during meals, helping with exercises, and engaging in conversations that mattered. He asked questions, listened intently, and tried to participate in the routines he had once ignored. His son responded positively, showing excitement and pride in the attention he was receiving. For the first time in months, the billionaire felt a sense of connection, a bond that had been absent due to his previous absence. He also took time to observe the maid, learning from her actions. He noticed how she handled challenges, guided his son through difficult moments, and balanced encouragement with patience. Her methods were simple, natural, and effective. He realized that he had been searching for solutions in complicated ways, through money, technology, or external help, when the answer had been right in front of him all along: human care, attention, and patience. One afternoon, he saw the maid helping his son with an activity that required coordination and balance. She guided him carefully, spoke gently, and offered praise with every attempt. His son laughed, and the billionaire could see the pride and joy in his eyes. He understood that these moments were shaping his son's confidence and self-esteem, teaching him resilience and independence. It was a lesson that could not be taught in a classroom or bought with money. The billionaire reflected on his own life. He had always valued achievement, wealth, and recognition. But he now realized that the greatest achievements were not measured by status or possessions. They were measured by love, care, and the positive impact one had on the lives of others. The maid, in her quiet and unassuming way, had achieved something far greater than any business deal or acquisition. She had nurtured, guided, and inspired. He also thought about the times he had taken her for granted, assuming that her presence was ordinary, that her work was simply a duty. He now understood that her work was extraordinary. Every act of care, every moment of patience, every word of encouragement had required skill, empathy, and heart. She had been a constant, unwavering force in his son's life. and he had only just begun to recognize the depth of her contribution. The billionaire realized that change was necessary not just for himself, but for the entire family. He needed to be present, to participate, and to appreciate the people who made life meaningful. He began to plan small ways to show gratitude, not just through words but through actions. He knew that recognition alone was not enough. He had to demonstrate respect, appreciation, and understanding for the maid's dedication. He also thought about his son, realizing how much he had grown under the maid's guidance. The boy had gained confidence, independence, and joy despite the challenges he faced. He had learned to trust, to persevere, and to find happiness in small victories. The billionaire felt a mixture of pride and humility. Understanding that his son's growth had been shaped largely by someone he had once overlooked. Over time, the billionaire began to participate more actively in daily routines. He joined exercises, helped with meals, and engaged in conversations with his son. He noticed the subtle improvements in his son's mood, confidence, and engagement. The laughter that had once been rare now filled the house more often. He realized that being present, even in small ways, had a profound impact. The relationship between the billionaire and the maid also shifted. He began to speak to her with genuine respect and gratitude, acknowledging her contribution and seeking her advice on how best to support his son. He recognized her expertise, her patience, and her unwavering care. He understood that she was more than a helper, she was a partner in nurturing his son's growth and happiness. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, the billionaire reflected on how much he had learned. He realized that life was not about rushing from one achievement to another, nor was it about accumulating wealth or recognition. True fulfillment came from relationships, presence, and the impact one had on the people around them. He had been given a lesson in humility, patience, and love by someone he had once overlooked, and had changed him forever. He understood that gratitude was not just about words, but about action. He began to think about ways to ensure that the maid felt valued and respected, ways to show that her dedication had not gone unnoticed. He also considered his own role as a father, realizing that he needed to be present, attentive, and engaged. He vowed to spend more time with his son, to support him, to participate fully in his life. The billionaire's reflection continued day after day. He noticed the small things, the way his son smiled at a challenge, the way the maid encouraged him to try again, the way their home had been filled with care and patience even in his absence. He understood that these moments, though quiet and often unnoticed, were the foundation of growth, confidence, and joy. In the end, he realized that witnessing the maid's incredible act had done more than help his son in a single moment. It had opened his eyes to what truly mattered, had changed how he viewed care, love, and responsibility, and had inspired him to become a better father, a more attentive family member, and a more compassionate person. He knew that life would never be the same again. He had been given a chance to see the world through the eyes of someone who cared deeply, who loved without expectation, and who transformed lives through patience and dedication. It was a lesson he would carry with him forever, shaping the way he lived, loved, and nurtured the people who mattered most. The son, unaware of the depth of his father's reflection, continued to thrive under the maid's guidance. The bond between them strengthened each day, filled with trust, laughter, and encouragement. And the billionaire, now fully aware of what he had been missing, began to embrace a new way of living a life filled with presence, gratitude, and a deep appreciation for the quiet heroes who make life meaningful. After weeks of reflection and observation, the billionaire finally felt ready to take meaningful action. He had watched the quiet strength of the maid and the courage of his son, and he knew that words alone would never be enough to honor what he had witnessed. He wanted to show his gratitude not just as a formality, but as a true acknowledgement of the dedication, patience, and love that had been poured into his son's life every single day. That morning, he called the maid into the study. His voice was steady but carried the weight of emotion that had been building inside him for weeks. She entered the room quietly, polite as always, expecting perhaps a routine instruction or a casual conversation. She did not expect the depth of feeling she was about to encounter. He began by speaking plainly, acknowledging everything he had seen. He told her how much he appreciated the countless small acts of care that had gone unnoticed, the patience she had shown, and the way she had nurtured his son's confidence and joy. He explained that he had spent weeks reflecting on her actions and the lessons he had learned from her dedication. Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel the recognition she had rarely received. She had never asked for acknowledgement, never expected reward. Yet here it was, genuine gratitude from someone whose approval she had not sought, but deeply respected. She listened quietly, her humility evident, but inside, a quiet pride warmed her. The billionaire continued, explaining how her presence had transformed his son's life. He spoke of the encouragement, the guidance, the moments of joy, and the sense of security she had provided. He admitted that he had been absent, that he had relied on money and convenience to stand in for presence, and that he had failed to notice the most important aspects of his son's growth. He confessed his guilt, but also expressed hope that things could change, that he could become more involved, and that their family could grow stronger together. The maid nodded, understanding his words, but her focus was still on the boy. She did not seek praise, but she understood its importance for him. She had devoted herself to her work with sincerity and love, and now she saw that it had been noticed, that it mattered. The billionaire then made a decision. He offered her a meaningful promotion within the household, not simply a change in title or pay, but a recognition of her integral role in their lives. He made it clear that her position was now one of trust, respect, and influence, reflecting not only her duties, but the profound impact she had on the family. It was an acknowledgement of her dedication, skill, and heart. The maid accepted, still quiet, still humble, but her eyes held a new light. She understood that her role was now officially valued, and that the family recognized her as more than just help. They saw her as part of their lives in a meaningful, permanent way. She smiled, not for herself, but for the boy, who had always been her focus. When she returned to the living room, the son immediately noticed the change. She knelt beside him, as she always did, and told him quietly that she had received recognition from his father. His eyes widened with understanding, and then a slow, radiant smile spread across his face. He felt proud not for her sake alone, but because he had been part of her life. Her dedication had made him stronger. The billionaire watched this interaction silently, feeling a warmth in his chest he had not experienced in years. He realized that gratitude, recognition, and respect were not just for formality, they were life-changing. Not only for those who received them, but for the family as a whole. He felt a deep connection, a sense of belonging and unity that had been missing. From that day on, the dynamics in the house began to shift. The billionaire made a conscious effort to be present in his son's life. He joined him for exercises, helped with meals, and took part in small activities that had once seemed insignificant, but now felt profoundly important. He listened to his son's thoughts, dreams, and frustrations, engaging with him fully. He watched as his son grew more confident, independent, and joyful with each passing day. The maid continued her work, but now with a renewed sense of partnership. She guided the boy, encouraged him, and inspired him as always, but she also noticed the father's growing presence. She saw the bond strengthening between them, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in witnessing the family grow together in a more balanced and loving way. The billionaire also learned to observe more closely, to notice the small details that made life meaningful. He noticed how the maid anticipated his son's needs before he even asked, how she celebrated his successes without exaggeration, and how she instilled confidence in him through gentle encouragement. He began to apply these lessons himself, learning from her example and discovering that love is expressed not in grand gestures, but in consistent, patient attention to the people who matter most. Over time, the son thrived. The exercises became easier, the daily routines smoother, and his confidence grew. He laughed more, engaged more, and found joy in activities he had once avoided out of fear or frustration. The presence of both his father and the maid created an environment where he could explore his abilities, face challenges with courage, and feel valued for who he was, rather than what he could or could not do. The billionaire realized that the true wealth in his life was not the fortune he had accumulated, nor the properties, businesses, or luxury items he owned. The real wealth was in these moments, the laughter of his son, the dedication of the maid, the bonds that had been strengthened by care, patience, and love. He understood that life's most important lessons are often taught by those who act quietly, consistently, and selflessly, shaping the lives of others in profound ways. He began to express his gratitude more openly, not only in words, but in deeds. He ensured the maid felt respected, involved her in decisions about the household, and asked for her guidance on how best to support his son's growth. He recognized that her expertise went beyond simple tasks. She had a deep understanding of how to nurture, inspire, and build confidence in someone facing challenges. The son, for his part, flourished under this newfound balance. He felt the presence of both his father and the maid as sources of encouragement, strength, and love. He realized that he was not alone, that he was supported by people who truly cared for him and believed in him. The small victories, the moments of joy, the laughter and playful encouragement, they all became building blocks of his confidence and self-esteem. The household itself became warmer, more connected. The billionaire, who had once been distant, now participated in daily life with intention and care. The maid, who had been quiet and humble, now received recognition and respect for her vital role. And the son, who had faced the world with limitations and uncertainty, now experienced a life filled with encouragement, love, and the belief that he could achieve meaningful goals. One evening, as the family sat together, watching the sunset through the tall windows, the billionaire reflected on the journey they had taken. He thought about his own absence, the lessons he had learned, and the ways in which the maid had taught him about love, care, and presence. He realized that true happiness was not about what he owned, but about the lives he touched, the relationships he nurtured, and the moments of connection he experienced with those he loved. The maid, quietly beside the son, smiled softly as she watched them together. She had always acted out of kindness and dedication, never seeking recognition or reward. Now she felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her efforts had mattered, that her care had shaped lives, and that she had helped create a family environment filled with love and understanding. The son, holding a small toy he had played with earlier, looked up at his father and the maid. His eyes shone with joy, trust, and confidence. He knew that he was supported, that he was loved, and that his abilities were valued. For the first time in a long while, he felt fully capable of embracing life. Knowing that he had people who believed in him and would stand by him through challenges, the billionaire reached out. Placing a hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the warmth and connection that had been missing, he smiled. Not for appearances or recognition, but for the deep human satisfaction of being truly present. He understood now that his role as a father was not only to provide, but to participate, to guide, and to love consistently. Over the following weeks and months, the family grew closer. The billionaire continued to learn from the maid, understanding that patience, care, and consistency were the foundations of meaningful relationships. The son continued to thrive, his confidence and happiness growing every day. The household was no longer simply a space of comfort and routine. It had become a home filled with connection, love, and mutual respect, the story of that incredible act, the moment. When the maid lifted the son and empowered him, remained a touchstone for the family, it reminded them of the power of patience, the importance of presence, and the life-changing impact of selfless care. It was a story they would carry in their hearts forever, a lesson in humility, gratitude, and the true meaning of family. The billionaire finally understood that recognition. Appreciation and love were the greatest gifts he could give and receive. The maid's dedication had transformed not only his son's life but his own perspective. She had shown him that the smallest acts of care, performed consistently and with heart, could create the most profound changes in the end. The family was stronger, closer, and more connected than ever. The son had grown in confidence and happiness. The maid had received the respect, gratitude, and recognition she deserved. And the billionaire had learned the most important lesson of all, that true wealth lies in the connections we nurture, the love we give, and the lives we touch together. They continued forward, a family bound not by fortune or circumstance, but by care, understanding, and the quiet, powerful acts of love that had transformed their lives forever.